History has some insane ways to die, but I'm about to tell you the single craziest one. A prince who was executed by being drowned in a giant barrel of his favorite wine. It sounds completely fake, but this is the 100% true story of George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence. He was royalty, the king's own brother, and his life of insane ambition and constant betrayal led to one of the weirdest deaths in all of history. For over 500 years, everyone's been asking, was he really dunked in a cask of sweet Malmsey wine? Or is that just an epic legend covering up a normal, boring death? Today, we are going to pour out the truth and see what's fact and what's fiction. To understand how a prince of England ends up in a wine barrel, we have to go back to the 15th century and the most brutal family feud in history, the Wars of the Roses. This wasn't a war between countries. It was cousin versus cousin, a total nightmare where one family tore itself apart, fighting for the ultimate prize, the English crown. This story is all about three brothers at the center of the chaos: Edward, George, and Richard of the House of York. They were the sons of the guy whose ambition basically started the whole war. When their dad was killed, the oldest brother, Edward, became the powerful King Edward IV. The youngest, Richard, would later become the infamous King Richard III. But we're focused on the middle brother, George, Duke of Clarence. The guy who was never happy, was dangerously ambitious, and tragically flawed. George had everything. He was born a prince, he was incredibly rich, and he was the king's brother. And yet, it was never enough for him. His life was a crazy spiral of conspiracies, betrayals, and weak apologies, all because he just couldn't stop wanting more. This treacherous path led him to a room in the Tower of London on February 18th, 1478, where he was executed for treason against his own brother. But because the execution was secret, it created this massive legend. Was he just executed like any other traitor? Or did King Edward, his own brother, give him one last, twisted, liquid goodbye? Born in 1449, George was literally a child of war. His first few years were defined by the chaos of the Wars of the Roses. Imagine being just a kid and watching your dad and older brothers flee from an army, leaving you, your mom, and your little brother Richard behind while soldiers destroy your town. He and Richard were even exiled for a while, all alone. It's no surprise that this insane childhood, a mix of extreme wealth and terrifying danger, made him the man he became. When his big brother, Edward, finally crushed their enemies and took the throne in 1461, George's life changed overnight. At just 11 years old, boom, he was made the Duke of Clarence, one of the most powerful titles in England. He was a prince, brother to the king, and for a while, he was even the heir to the throne because Edward wasn't married yet. This taste of power was intoxicating. He and his younger brother, Richard, were at the center of it all. A world of huge parties, political games, and insane wealth. In the beginning, George was a huge supporter of his brother. The New Yorkist kingdom was shaky, and the king needed his family's loyalty more than anything. George was given tons of land and titles. From the outside, the three York brothers looked like an unstoppable team that had survived a war and won. But underneath, George was already getting jealous and ambitious. He was handsome, charming, and knew he was a big deal. But he was also stubborn and easily influenced. He saw his brother Edward on the throne, a job he probably thought he deserved just as much, if not more. This hunger for more power led him straight to a man who promised him everything. Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, a guy we now call the Kingmaker. The Earl of Warwick was the most powerful guy in England, and the main reason Edward was even king. But by the late 1460s, their relationship was falling apart. Edward was acting like a real king and making his own decisions, especially marrying a commoner, Elizabeth Woodville, whose family was suddenly getting super powerful. Warwick hated it. He felt his influence disappearing, and in the jealous Duke of Clarence, he found the perfect pawn. Warwick offered him the ultimate prize. He had 2 daughters, Isabel and Anne, who were the richest girls in the country. He offered the older one, Isabel, to George. King Edward IV told him no, absolutely not, seeing it for what it was, a dangerous team-up between a powerful lord and his restless brother. But did George listen? Of course not. In July 1469, he defied the king, sailed to France, and married Isabel Neville. This wasn't just a family argument. This was rebellion. Right after the wedding, Warwick and Clarence launched their master plan. They started a new rebellion, and with Edward distracted, they invaded. Their plan worked shockingly well, and they actually captured King Edward IV. The Kingmaker and his new son-in-law were in charge. George was closer to the throne than ever, and probably thought Warwick was about to fire Edward and make him king. But ruling with a kidnapped king was impossible. The country fell into chaos, and Warwick had to let Edward go. In 1470, they tried again. This time they failed and had to flee to France as traitors. There, Warwick made a mind-blowing move. He teamed up with his greatest enemy, Margaret of Anjou, the wife of the old Lancastrian king Henry VI. Their new plan was to put the Lancastrians back on the throne. And what about George? He was thrown aside. Warwick married his other daughter to Henry VI's son. George, the Duke of Clarence, had been completely played. He betrayed his own brother for a crown he never got. Facing this ultimate betrayal, George did what he did best. He switched sides. Again. Realizing his father-in-law was never going to make him king, George secretly made a deal with his brother Edward. When Edward came back from exile in 1471 to reclaim his kingdom, George ditched Warwick and rejoined his brothers. His betrayal was a massive blow to the other side. George fought alongside his brothers at the huge battles of Barnet, where his father-in-law Warwick was killed, and Tewkesbury. With the Yorkists winning and King Henry VI murdered in the Tower, King Edward IV was back in charge. And, in a shocking move, Edward publicly forgave George. He was back in the royal circle and even got more titles and land. On the surface, everything was great. The 3 sons of York were a team again. But the trust was shattered forever. The next few years were filled with George's growing paranoia and weird behavior. He got into a huge fight with his younger brother, Richard, over their inheritance, a fight the king himself had to stop. Then, in 1476, his wife, Isabel, died. George was devastated, but his sadness turned into a dark obsession. He was convinced she'd been poisoned. He took the law into his own hands, arrested one of Isabel's old ladies-in-waiting, Anchoret Twiniho, and forced a fake trial. He bullied the jury into a guilty verdict, and Anchoret was hanged for a crime she almost definitely didn't commit. This was a massive abuse of power. George was acting like he was the king. People saw him spiraling into paranoia and possibly alcoholism. He was a ticking time bomb, and King Edward's patience was about to run out. After executing a woman just because he was paranoid, George's defiance got even bigger. When King Edward investigated some of George's own friends for treason and dark magic, George openly challenged him. He had a priest storm into Parliament and publicly read out statements declaring the dead men were innocent. This was a massive slap in the face to the king. But he went even further. he started spreading the most dangerous rumor imaginable, that King Edward IV himself was illegitimate, that their mother had an affair, and that he had no right to be king. This was the ultimate treason. He wasn't just criticizing the king, he was trying to destroy his brother's entire claim to the throne and get people to rebel. For King Edward IV, this was the last straw. He had forgiven George's first betrayal, his teaming up with their enemies, and his paranoid outbursts. But this, a public attack on his legitimacy from his own brother, was something he could not let slide. Edward summoned George, personally confronted him with his unnatural, loathly treasons, and had him arrested on the spot. George, Duke of Clarence, was thrown into the Tower of London. In January 1478, his trial was basically just a formality. King Edward IV himself came to Parliament and read the list of crimes against his brother. The verdict was a guaranteed. George was condemned to death for high treason. The king supposedly hesitated for days. This was his brother. But the threat was simply too great. The sentence had to be carried out. The only question was, how? On February 18th, 1478, inside the Tower of London, George Plantagenet was put to death. Unlike most nobles who were beheaded in front of a crowd, George got one last royal perk. His execution was private. This one decision, meant to hide the family's shame, is exactly what created the mystery that has fascinated people for centuries. With no public witnesses and no official record, the rumors started to fly. And what a legend it became. Almost immediately, the story started to spread that the Duke of Clarence, famous for his love of drinking, had been drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine. A butt was a massive barrel holding around 126 gallons, way more than enough to drown a man. Malmsey was a super popular sweet wine, and it was supposedly George's absolute favorite. Just imagine how insane that scene would be. Not a quick chop from an axe, but a bizarre, ritualistic killing. Was he forced into the barrel? Was he stripped of his clothes and titles and plunged headfirst into the sweet, sticky wine that had been one of his life's great pleasures? The symbolism is almost too perfect. A man whose appetites destroyed him, finally drowning in a symbol of that very greed. Some versions of the story even say that George, given a choice of how to die, chose this himself. Was it a final dark joke from a man known for his wild behavior? We can only imagine him laughing as they rolled in the barrel, joking about his own death. This image of a prince being buried alive in a wine barrel is so powerful and so strange that it has completely taken over the real story. For all its drama, the wine barrel story is just a rumor. The hard truth is, we don't know for sure how George died. We only know he was executed privately and that he wasn't beheaded. An exhumation of his body in the 20th century showed his head was still attached to his shoulders. Not beheading him was weird, but it doesn't prove the wine story. So where did the legend come from? One theory is it was just black humor. George was known for drinking a lot. After he died, a dark joke might have started that he'd finally drowned in his cups, a joke that over time people started to believe was real. Another theory is just a simple mix-up. Back then, to transport a body over a long distance, they would preserve it in a cask of alcohol. It's totally possible that after being executed some other way, George's body was put in a butt of wine for the trip to his burial. Anyone who saw a body being put into a wine barrel could have easily started the rumor that this was how he died. And then, of course, the legend got a supercharge from William Shakespeare in his play Richard III. Shakespeare has assassins stab Clarence and then say, "I'll drown you in the Malmsey butt within." For generations, Shakespeare's version was history. cementing the wine barrel legend forever. Yet, there is one tantalizing clue that keeps the legend alive. A portrait of George's daughter, Margaret Pole, shows her wearing a bracelet with a bunch of charms. One of them looks like a tiny, detailed wine barrel. Why would she wear that? Was it a quiet, secret tribute to her father and the infamous story of his death? We'll probably never know for sure. It's still an unsolved mystery. If you're fascinated by the dark and bizarre side of royal history and the mysteries that time has left behind, make sure you smash that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss our next trip into the craziest parts of the past. George Plantagenet's life was a total tragedy, and he mostly brought it on himself. He was the brother of a king, born with more power and privilege than almost anyone on earth, and he threw it all away. Driven by jealousy and endless ambition, he betrayed his family again and again, scheming until his brother, the king, had no choice but to eliminate him. His private execution was supposed to be a quiet end to a very loud life. Instead, the secrecy around his death created one of history's most enduring and ghoulishly fascinating legends. The story of the Duke drowned in wine has survived for more than 500 years, proving how much we love macabre stories where fact and fiction get tangled up. So, what do you think? Was George Plantagenet really drowned in a cask of his favorite wine? A final, ironic twist in a life of excess? Or is it just a fantastic story? A dark joke that was just too good to die? Let us know your theory in the comments below.